Now in part 3, we're going to ask the question, how do we bring a brother or sister who is wandering back? How do we go about the process of going to someone and bring them back, trying to restore them back to Jesus, to the community of Jesus, of the local church? Well, in these verses, James talks about the fundamental need and the call to approach someone who is wandering and bring them back, but he doesn't give us any practical tips on how we go about doing that. So we're going to look now to the words of Jesus, whom James leans on very heavily indeed in this letter. And we're going to go to the words of Jesus recorded in Matthew 5 and Matthew 18 to give us some more practical steps on how we bring a brother or sister back. How do we go about doing that? Matthew 5, 23 and 24, Jesus says this: "If you are offering your gift at the altar, and there you remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there at the altar and go. First," he says, "be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift." The point that Jesus is driving at here is that if you suspect that your brother or sister has something against you, you are to take the first steps to deal with it. Now, it's important that you understand, and we gather what Jesus is saying here. If someone else has something against you, you are the one to go and take the first steps. You're to take the initiative. Now, it might be that someone has something against you because you've done something stupid. You've sinned against them. You've offended them either on purpose or without realizing it. So yeah, of course, you have to go. If you've done something dumb, you have to go and be reconciled to that person. That's, say you're sorry. Just get it out there. Do it. Get it done. Heal that relationship, and then come back to worship. But that's not entirely what Jesus is saying. He says, if you remember that your brother has something against you, irrespective of what it is, it might be that you've done nothing wrong at all, but you just get the feeling that someone has some problem with you, something brewing under the surface, maybe, even irrespective of whether their grievance is legitimate or not. This is not about attributing blame or figuring out who's right and who's wrong. Jesus is saying, if there's any sniff or suggestion that there is some disharmony between you and a brother or sister within the community, then before you even engage in the acts of worship, stop. Go to that person and be reconciled, bring peace, bring love, bring forgiveness. Open up that line of conversation first, deal with that first, and then come to worship. That's what Jesus says. First teaching. Second teaching Jesus has for us is in Matthew 18. He says, if your brother or sister sins against you, go and tell them his or her fault between you and him alone. If he listens to you, you have gained your brother. You've won them back. You've repaired or re-established community where it has been threatened. So the point here in this second teaching from Matthew 18 from Jesus is that if you are sinned against, if someone has done something against you, of course you've every right to be upset and respond with anger, righteous anger, or sadness, or disappointment, or hurt, or whatever. But you are to go to that person as well. So you can see in these two teachings from Matthew 5 and Matthew 18, Jesus is saying, if someone's got a problem with you, you go and win them back. If you've got a problem with someone else, you go and win them back. Whether someone's done something to you or you've done something to them, you go and win them back. It's on you. Don't delay, says Jesus. Don't just sit there waiting. Don't sit there meditating and getting all bitter. He's done something wrong. She's offended me. She looked at me funny. He said something that I can't let go of. It's not about being offended or being the offender in this scenario. What Jesus is getting at here, and what underlies what James is teaching us, no matter where the blame lies, you take the responsibility of going to that brother or sister who is wandering, and your aim is to bring a brother back. Your aim is to restore community, to win them over, to bring them back to the community of faith. But from James, we are seeing in his whole letter, there is a broader application still. Not only is it a personal offense of sin or one thing done against one other person, but the tone of his entire letter here is trying to help us to grab a hold of real religion and reject fake religion. And we've seen that time and again. And, I don't have time to go through all that just now. I need to go back and listen on our podcast. But if you're seeing someone, as we've said earlier, who's using their tongue to break down rather than build up, if you're seeing someone in your community who's being filled with jealousy, who is using corrupt business practices in their work life, you are to go to that person and bring a brother back. You're to challenge them. You're to bring them back to the fold, because they're wandering. They're wandering away from the truth. They're wandering away from the life that flows from that truth. If you see patterns, behaviors, if you see traits that are starting to rise up in that person's life or the way that they are doing life, if you've got any concerns, you are to go with humility and love and respect and go to that person because of what Jesus has done for you, bringing you back to God. You're to go. Put aside all personal offenses and go. You are to take every step that you can to restore that brother or sister back, to restore community where it is ruptures. Can you see for a moment or two how radical this is compared to the world out there? Maybe your experience in work or other scenarios outside of church have shown you how ordinarily people deal with conflict and with wandering and all that. We just see it's dealt with by slander and maybe just avoiding that person who's annoyed us or upset us, or being all passive aggressive towards them, or just pure hating on them and doing everything we can to hurt them back. But this is not how it is in the church. It's not how it should be in the church. Because the values within the gospel-centered, spirit-empowered community on the church, community on mission, are so very different from what we see out there in the world. I wonder, as we're going through these practical steps of going, taking initiative, does a certain person come to your mind? Or maybe several people come to your mind? Do you have right now a need to act? Is God the Holy Spirit guiding you to say, I need you, I want you to go to this person or that person. I want you to lift the phone. I want you to establish communication. I want you to arrange a meeting. Obviously over Zoom at the moment, or FaceTime. I want you to sit down with them. And here's how such a conversation might go for now or for some time in the future. You might sit down with a brother or sister from your community, from Foundation Church. You might say, brother, sister, I'm for you. I love you as family. We are in this together. But you know what? There's just something that I'm concerned about. That I see, and I just want to talk through it. You know what, I might be wrong, so forgive me if I'm wrong, but I've just noticed an issue in your life that I think we need to talk about. That's maybe how such a conversation would go. And let me just say, I've been there myself plenty of times. It is tough. It's not always the most fun conversation starter, let's say. And it's scary, at times anyway. But here's what I do want to say to you. I have seen great breakthrough when I have taken these words of James and Jesus seriously. God has given power. He's given faith. And I've seen breakthrough. I've seen people responding to my efforts to humbly challenge and to talk. And I've seen grace being applied. I've seen new beginnings starting as a result of one awkward, challenging conversation. There's no getting around it. It is awkward, it is challenging, and yet the rewards are great. When community can be reestablished, when wandering brothers and sisters are brought back, the joy of bringing them back. Sometimes we can talk about stuff on the phone, and a quick phone call is sufficient. Most often, such conversations need to happen face to face. There's just so much value in these non-verbal communications. Our facial expressions and our body language can communicate so much more than just a text message or an email can do. I would just say, if you are, as and when you are embarking on these sort of conversations, avoid written communication. Text messaging and emails are great for some forms of communication, but when it comes to this sort of heart and soul, help me understand, I love you, kind of conversations, it's got to be face to face at the very least on the phone. So yeah, just avoid written communication in this scenario. It's easily misread, isn't it? Easily misinterpreted. But what I would say is go when you do go, when you're the person to go, taking the initiative, Go prayerfully, go humbly. Don't think you've got all the facts and that your way of seeing things is infallible, that you've got it all sussed. That's why we go and say, look, I could be wrong, but this is what I'm seeing, and help me understand, and let's talk about that. You go with humility. You go with love in your heart, not to condemn or judge and say, you're wrong, you're sinning, you've sinned against me. We go with love and with a heart to restore. We go with the knowledge of what Jesus has done for us in our hearts and minds. That breaks down any form of pride or arrogance, knowing that you and I have wandered too and that God has brought us back through Jesus. Therefore, we're going simply to a fellow wanderer and saying, brother, sister, let me talk to you. Let me discuss this with you. But go. This is the key takeaway message. Don't delay. Don't let this fester. Bring a brother back. Because if the wandering has begun, then as James says in verse 20, there is a terrible destination ahead for the brother or sister who wanders. At Foundation Church, we have a duty of care. Those of us who are in sort of identified as members, who are in covenant community with one another, we have a duty of care to each other. We have made promises to go after one another, to go and say, brother, sister, come back, because that's what it means to be a community on mission.